Welcome to World Horse Welfare's virtual conference, Accountability for Welfare in Equestrianism, looking beyond the obvious, which is kindly supported by our headline sponsor, Agria, and our corporate partner, Lemur. We are delighted to welcome so many of you here today, a global audience that includes representatives from a wide range of equestrian disciplines and sectors. We hope that the next 3 hours will provide each of you with food for thought and that it will spark ideas that will help you to move forward within your own sector of the horse world. Because that is the reason we, World Horse Welfare, have organised this event today, to support everyone in horse sport to keep the welfare of the horse at its heart so it can have a strong future. Today's conference follows on from the one we held in January 2024, which is still available to view online, with a continued focus on equestrianism's social licence to operate, or in other words, the acceptability of our sport to the public. Last year's event focused on what we, the horse world, can learn from other industries. Today's conference brings the conversation back to us, as it considers the factors that may lead to unwanted practices within equestrian sport and offers innovative and progressive solutions to the challenges identified. Actions that, if taken forward, will surely help to show the public that we are serious about improving the welfare of horses, but that provide us with so much enjoyment. We will be guided through these topics by some of sport's most experienced and progressive individuals. The insights they will share with us today have been gained through many years of diverse experience in equestrianism and gymnastics, because we are delighted to be joined today not only by experienced equestrians, but also by Sarah Powell, Chief Executive of British Gymnastics, who has overseen a significant reform and culture change programme within her organisation, and from whom I know we can all learn valuable lessons. We are immensely grateful to all our speakers, Sarah, Meta Udall, Tim Downs and Meta Osborne, and to our chair, David Eads, all of whom have given up their time to share their knowledge, experience and ideas. But what are the content of today's conference? By way of an introduction, we're going to show a short video.
World Horse Welfare was created almost 100 years ago by Ada Cole, an extraordinary woman whose courage, vision and determination led her to campaign tirelessly for better treatment of horses at the end of their working lives. She believed that we owe it to horses to always treat them fairly, particularly when they give so much of themselves to benefit us. Since those early days, the charity has expanded its influence to improve welfare across the full spectrum of the global horse world, from working horses across the world that sustain livelihoods to those used as a source of food, and from pet ponies and leisure animals to elite sport horses. Through a combination of care, research, education and influence, our approach is to improve welfare within the horse-human relationship, taking a caring yet pragmatic approach to everything that we do. This includes equestrian sport, which we fully support when all those involved act responsibly and ethically, with equine welfare prioritised. To that end, we act as a critical friend of horse sport, working in an independent capacity with organisations such as the International Horse Sport Confederation, the British Horse Racing Authority, the FEI, various national federations and a range of other equestrian organisations. And it is sport that is our focus today, as we look at where accountability lies when horses' welfare is compromised. Media headlines in recent years have put the spotlight on incidents and practices that do not meet the high welfare standards expected in horse sport. It's very easy to focus on the individual who's most obviously involved, the rider, perhaps, or the owner, or the person we see hitting a horse in a video clip. These individuals are undoubtedly guilty of inappropriate or uneducated behaviour. But does responsibility for their actions lie solely with them? What pressures are they under? What knowledge might they be lacking? What structures and dynamics within sport might be incentivising them to behave in this way? In other words, what might be driving good people to do bad things? We look forward to exploring this with you today.
The video has outlined the main question that we have asked our speakers to explore. But why this question this year? Because in many ways 2024 was a great year for equestrianism and for horses. The Olympics were a spectacular focal point. And among other highlights, we also saw the initiation of the FAI's Action Plan for Equine Welfare, excellent initiatives from many national federations, and the launch of a global community of practice, a joint venture between the universities of Nottingham here in the UK and Melbourne in Australia. But 2024 was also a challenging year for horse sport. A report from the Danish Animal Ethics Council concluded that there is a need for a cultural change in equestrian sport. And there was extensive media coverage of unsaviour training practices, welfare compromises to horses competing at the highest levels, and horses disposed of in sickening ways. In all of these instances, it is easy to point the finger at one or two bad individuals, bad apples we would like to think, in a world where most people love their horses and do the right thing. But it isn't always as easy as deciding who are the good people and who are the bad. These people have all grown up in a system. They have almost certainly normalised practices, traditions and attitudes that prevail within that system. And they are subject to the pressures and incentives that arise from the complex dynamics of the equestrian world. So are they solely to blame for their actions? Perhaps when things go wrong for horses, this is a symptom of a deeper issue. And as any good vet will tell you, if you are to be able to cure the symptoms, you need to find the cause. And it is this trail from symptom to cause that we have asked our speakers to explore from the standpoint of their own experience. But what of our own experience, all of us here today? Might we, individually or collectively, be in some way accountable for some of the less savoury events that occur, some of which make it into the public consciousness and some of which don't? Such accountability could be an act of omission rather than commission, but we should all at least consider the possibility that there may be things that we can do to change our sports for the better, so that good practice is rewarded at all times, including behind closed doors. The ultimate goal, of course, being that all the horses that allow us to enjoy our sport live good lives from birth to death, and that their association with us, the people who own, manage, train and ride them, is as positive for them as it is for us. To help us explore this issue and to suggest initiatives that could positively influence equine welfare, we are fortunate indeed to be joined by our panel of speakers whose equestrian experience spans from the Olympic disciplines to racing and from grassroots equestrianism to elite sport. Collectively, their experience includes coaching, riding, judging, breeding, practicing veterinary medicine, regulating sport, doing research and exploring horse sport from the standpoints of both welfare and ethics. So now it is my pleasure to welcome David Eads, who will chair our conference today. David is a highly regarded MC and moderator, having spent 3 decades as a frontline presenter and broadcaster for the BBC. This included a post as senior sports news correspondent, a position that led to assignments across most sports, including racing. David has hosted many sports events, most notably the Asian Racing Conference since 2005, and has worked closely with the Jockey Club, British Horse Racing Authority, and several other racing concerns. He also works within the Olympic world and is a vice president of the International Masters Games Association. Beyond sporting interests, David focuses his conference work on issues surrounding our climate, energy and logistics. Among his many accolades, David has been credited with showing extraordinary patience and grace under pressure when things get a bit choppy. I really hope we don't end up testing him on this one today, but suffice to say, I can think of no one better to chair our conference and moderate the panel discussion than David Eads. David.
Well, Rowley, thank you, first of all, for a very generous introduction. I hope the waters won't get too choppy over the course of the next few hours, but I think you've laid out very eloquently there the challenges ahead of us for this particular event. And I just can stand by. There are some really excellent speakers covering all the key areas of this welfare challenge that we'll be able to hear from and talk to in the course of this particular event. My first job, though, is to just remind you about the headline sponsor, Agria, for this particular event. And we have a short video to show you on Agria's involvement.
I'm really pleased to be here today. My name is Vicky Wentworth and I'm the Chief Executive of Agria UK. We are really proud to have been the first insurer of a horse in 1890 in Europe, and we're also a provider of insurance to small pets. But actually, over and above being an insurance provider, there's two things that we stand for, which I'm really proud of. One is we are the only carbon positive pet insurer, so we're very, very strong on sustainability. The other is really close to our heart is the welfare of animals and the welfare of the animals that we insure particularly. We're so proud to be partnering with World Horse Welfare. We've kind of got this accountability as humans, because horses wouldn't be here if we didn't use them for sport or for pleasure. I think from that perspective it's really important that we sort of embrace social license and we do the best we possibly can by them. I am so proud that Agria is partnering with World Horse Welfare, this umbrella organisation that does so much good for the welfare of our equine friends, but also the equestrian fraternity. We're doing something this year called learning their language, because if you sit still long enough and just watch, horses often tell you a multitude of things, what's going on, whether they're happy or they're sad or they're lame or they're not, whether they are suffering any discomfort. And I think that's really profound. So learning their language is something that we're really going to be focusing on this year. I am so proud to be partnering with World Horse Welfare. I know you're going to have a great day. There's great content, great output, and I hope you enjoy.
First, though, to our key speaker on this issue of cultural change. Now, I think it's recognised within equestrianism that this is important. It's an element that must take place. And perhaps the best way to look at it is through the lens of an organisation which has taken this head on effectively. It's another sport, but with many similarities to equestrianism in terms of perhaps the vulnerability of many of the participants. So I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, who is Sarah Powell. Sarah is the current CEO of British Gymnastics, and she's led a new long-term strategy overseeing significant reform and a culture change program within gymnastics. And her previous role as CEO of Sport Wales also followed some fairly similar themes there. Sarah saw through a substantial program of organisational change and redesign, the impact of which was to see increased success for Welsh athletes, both at Olympic and Paralympic level, and in particular also then at Commonwealth Games, both in 2014 and 2018. I mean, I think I've said enough to show you that Sarah has a considerable pedigree within the world of international sport, and coupled with her experience in organizational change, of moving a sport towards a new path. Absolutely thrilled to introduce Sarah to you, who's going to address the topic of culture shifts in sport, identifying the issues, developing a strategy, and managing change. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to Rowley. I suppose I did think at the first instance when I was asked to come and speak at your virtual conference, what would gymnastics and the world of horse welfare have in common? But actually, the more I've listened and the more I've spoken to people, I can see real synergy within our journey of reform and the journey that you're taking. I hope today that I will be able to share some of my experiences and some of the lessons that we're going through, but they are only lessons. They are not here as a blueprint to how you do this. We're still learning and we're still listening to others as part of our reform. A little bit about me and why I became the CEO of British Gymnastics. Sport has always been intrinsic to my life. It's been an important part of how I've grown up. I've played sport all my life, and it has given me huge opportunities to travel the world internationally. It's given me highs and lows, and unfortunately when you played international hockey for Wales, there were a lot of lows when I played. But it brought me resilience, but at the end of it, it was all about positive experiences. And that was crucial to me when I took on the role as CEO of British Gymnastics, because I knew it was in a crisis. But I also knew that if we bring the sport together and set a good culture and set the foundations for that sport, that I could leave a lasting legacy. So that's why I got involved, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about our journey. So I think it's important to start with our context. I'll then talk about Reform 25 and how we responded. I'll do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the policy changes that we've had to look at, and I'm going to talk a little bit about performance, and then finish off with some of the challenges that we still face. I think it's important to set the context, because within the context of gymnastics, I think we'll start seeing some of the alignment. A huge recreational sport, over 1.5 million people taking part every month. We personally have over 400,000 members, very young, starting at, my daughter does gymnastics, she's 5. That first introduction, that foundation to sport, a lot of children involved in the sport under 12, a lot of females involved in the sport, very recreational, but also has high talent, early specialization within our sport. And when you think about that early specialization and you think about the age demographic and the hours that are spent training and developing, you start seeing some characteristics in our sport that may be looking at risk factors. So there are unique things that come into our sport that bring complexity. Early power dynamics, that coach-gymnast relationship, coach-gymnast-parent relationship, high training hours at a very young age. So that contact between the coach and the gymnast becoming very intense very early on. Similarly, within our sport, there is a practices and culture of long training hours, a link between success and the level of training and the hours in the gym. Also a success culture that is seen from other international nations, such as the Eastern Bloc, a regime that is very different to our societal regimes. When you start bringing this all together, you start seeing characteristics within our sport that maybe you would call alarm bells, things that we needed to be far more aware of. I say all of this in the context as well as we are multidisciplinary. We have some sports that are Olympic and some disciplines that are non-Olympic. That again brings additional challenges. Some that are well funded and have lots of opportunity, some that are not so well funded. Again, complexity within our sport. But before I go and talk about the challenges, I think one of the things I learned very early on in our culture change journey is, although this is really, really important to what we need to do for our sport, there is 90% of the activity that is going on in gymnastics is a really positive one. It is providing those positive experiences for so many. And we needed to keep reminding ourselves of that when we were doing the reforms, when we were talking about the issues, and constantly reminding our sport that actually 95% of it was doing the right practices, was doing the right things. So why gymnastics? Where did this all come from? I think everybody around the world will have heard of Athlete A and the horrendous situation in the USA with Larry Nassar. But it wasn't just in the US, it was also seen in other nations. So New Zealand, Australia. So gymnastics became under the spotlight very quickly. When Athlete A was broadcast in the UK, we were having around about 250 complaints per year. When that was launched in 2020, we went from 250 complaints to 500 complaints within the month of it being published. There was a sudden influx of people becoming aware of the issues within gymnastics, and the voices were raised. This is not a negative, it's a positive, but it suddenly turned the light onto the sport. But this isn't just, as we know, in gymnastics. You've already alluded to it in horse sport. We see it in dancing, we're seeing it in swimming, we're seeing it in football. This was an issue that was being seen right across sport. And my reflections when I talk about this, when I came into gymnastics, was although there was a shock within the sport, there was also very quickly a denial. And that denial came from a position of, it's only a few bad apples. Or actually, yeah, but our sport needs this. We need to have this long training hours. There was a lack of willingness to really listen to those that were impacted and affected in the sport. Dismissed too quickly. The cultural norms were just reinforced and re-established, but we need to do this, otherwise we're not going to succeed. And this word around success came up a lot. We could see it in other nations. We need to continue to do this. Again, this reinforcement of practices and cultural norms that were not healthy for our sport. I'm going to recall a story, and I think it just reflects that if we're not listening, we don't really see the issue. A gymnast came to speak to me and she said, I know you may not think this is a big deal, but actually if you're involved in gymnastics from the age of 5, and from about the age of 8, I was in a talent pathway. So I was already seen as an elite gymnast, but I was being told I wasn't good enough. And I was being told I was overweight. But I was being told that every day, from the age of 8 to the age of 16, 17, when by that point, I had no self-worth. I actually believed it. I believed I was no good. I believed I didn't deserve to be an elite gymnast. And I think it was that drip, drip, drip that suddenly resonated with me, that actually this isn't something I'm going to just walk into a gym and see. It's something that I really have to explore and understand and listen to really get to the bottom of what is happening here. That led to the White Review. So the White Review was commissioned by Sport England and UK Sport specifically to look at gymnastics in the UK. Anne White did a comprehensive 2-year review with 4 key recommendations and 602 pages of information for us to take forward. So our response, very quickly pulled together our response of actions. And this was called Reform 25. And that word is key, reform, because reform doesn't talk about change alone. It talks about changing in attitudes and beliefs. So if you're truly going to reform, then you need to change people's attitudes and beliefs. And part of this was not just about gymnastics. We recognized that, yes, we could do things within our sport. What we needed to look internationally, we needed to look at the Federation of International Gymnastics, and we also had a responsibility for the wider sport sector. And this is the role that we've taken to use the reform journey to actually leave a wider legacy. So in terms of our response, we looked at 4 key areas. Of course, we needed to start with culture and our strategy, but we needed to look at how we were dealing. And I've started with welfare, not complaints, because at the moment we talk more about the complaints and not really about the welfare. Education of coaching practices I'll come back to, and our performance environment. All of these were interconnected. None of them were looked separately. All of them had to work. So our response was holistic and systemic in its approach. But at the outset, there was an absolute acknowledgement and an ownership of the issues, not just an apology. So I'm going to talk through a range of responses, and you'll see that there is a significant number of things that we've taken forward as part of our action. I'm not going to go into all of them. I won't have the time. But we started with our vision and values because right at the outset, we needed to set a new direction. So this is the front cover of our new strategy, and there's some key words in here around a new vision for a new era. We absolutely had to learn from the past and recognize those characteristics and cultural norms that are built up into our sport. But we needed to set out that this was about a new era and a new vision. And it was about the experience, very much about the experience. Before we talked about more members, more medals, more money. Now we were talking about uplifting experiences for all. So in our welfare and safeguarding elements, we talked about developing training and awareness, not policing. This was about recognizing we wanted people to come forward and talk to us about the issues they were facing. This wasn't about blame. This was about recognizing the challenges and working with the teams. And a lot of this work has been around education and awareness, working with experts, collaborating with experts in the field to really understand what was needed. Education, we call it learning and development, really fundamental to how we were going to move things forward. We had coaches that were feeling that they were no longer wanted in our sport. They were feeling the blame. They were feeling the spotlight. And our role was to really step back and understand what was happening in our coaching environment. And we could see coaching practices of old that we needed to address very, very quickly, particularly around weight management, nutrition, training. But at the heart of this was bringing coaches with us, understanding that they still needed to work in what we're calling the grey, because you still need to understand how you develop performance. And how do you do that if you don't have the confidence to know when to step in or when to push? And how do you work with very young gymnasts to develop their performance? So we talk a lot about reflective practices, a lot about ethical considerations and ethical coaching. And that's something that I would like to learn more from you, and I'd like to learn more across sport, because if we could marble this sort of good practice, this philosophy of care, but really understanding these ethical decisions that need to be made day in, day out, then I really think we're going to start making the difference. Engaging with experts has been fundamental to some of our work. And we've tried to bring in a different approach to how we inform and educate across gymnastics. Previously, we had all of this information in policy documents. We're now shifting them to much more user-friendly information so that people know what is right and wrong. It's proper guidance and giving ownership to the gymnasts. So this is using language around your body, your choice. Our safe and fair campaign, raising awareness across the sport. As I say, working with others. For us, this is very much about parents, gymnasts, coaches. And one of the big cultural shifts that we've seen within our sport is bringing parents into co-production of policies, co-production of our awareness, co-production of our handbooks and information that we're sharing. It is not right for us to expect gymnasts to take all of that information, and we need to work with the parents and the coaches. Performance. In some ways, lots of people thought that actually by doing all of this, we no longer want to win, or we hear, unfortunately, that we've gone soft. That is not what this is about. This is actually about a performance edge for us. If we get this right, then we believe our performance will be enhanced. And at the heart of this has been a brave decision, I believe, across the organisation to shift some of our policy focuses. Because at the heart of this, our policies guide and inform the decision-making and the environment and the practices within our coaching. So the way that we've gone about this is we've used the position statements from the White Report. We've absolutely underpinned this with expertise, the science, the legislation, the experience. We've then gone out to consult because we need to bring people with us, because these are big shifts within our sport. We need to change those hearts and minds. We need to collaborate around the development, and then we need to support once we launch these products. The reason why I talk about policies is because these can shift practices very quickly. And I go back to the coaching practices which were endemic in our sport. And I'm going to pick on the weighing of gymnasts. There was a belief around appropriate weight and the weight management that we needed to address. And that needed to be really clear for parents and for gymnasts, that we were no longer enabling people to weigh gymnasts. This was not part of our culture. It was not part of our coaching practices. And the reason we did this so clearly is that there was always this grey line. Well, should we do it? Should we not do it? No, there is no need to weigh a gymnast unless it is done with medical support and for a medical reason. And even when that is done, there is no reason to tell that weight to the parents or the coaches, because it became a nervous area for gymnasts that they didn't want their coaches informed. So we needed to create a safe environment, but we needed to be very clear through our policy and practices what was acceptable. The other, I think, is really important for our sport was around academic education. There was a belief that to win and succeed, you needed to come out of school. You needed to be in training environments more than you needed to have your education. And for me, this wasn't about academic. This was truly about all the benefits you get from being in school. And it is the right of a child to be educated and to socialize and have all the things that come with being involved in that environment. Similarly, we wanted to be really clear that we do not believe that being out of school meant that you were going to be more successful, because that was reinforcing the belief that long training hours was enabling you to be successful. So I say all of this because I do believe taking strong stances around policies and guidance does enable a quick shift from practices of old to new ways and new practices. I'm going to talk a little bit about performance because, again, as I say, there was a view that by doing all of this, that performance was no longer important to British gymnastics. And actually, it's an honour for British gymnastics to be able to take people to World Championships and to the Olympics, and for them to live their dreams, to have their ambitions come true. But by enabling all of this in the reform plan, and I keep coming back to it, reform was not about safeguarding. It was not about managing complaints. This was about a holistic approach to changing the way that we delivered our sport, from performance all the way down to recreational. And we launched for the LA cycle our new performance focus, which will be collective accountability. And at the heart of this, it is bringing the voice of the gymnast to a position where the gymnast is actually owning their performance plan and their performance journey, enabling them to co-create what that performance plan and performance journey looks like, working with the gymnast, the coach, the parent. And we call it a collective accountability loop. And we've used an infinity symbol because this is continual. It's endless in its approach. It's not something that we will do at the beginning and then we will review it a year on, or we'll review it at the end of the Olympic cycle. This is a constant that goes through everything that we do in performance. The gymnast, the environment they work in, the coaches that they work with, the performance sport support team that are really important, again, within this power dynamic. It's not the coach leading and the support staff secondary, and the gymnast secondary, all of them in this collective accountability, and making sure this is understood within the performance environment and within the club environment. Ensuring that Olympic success is driven through the voice of the gymnast. So, to our future, what are we still learning? We're still learning a lot. We're taking on a bit more of a pre-mortem approach. Some of you may be aware of this. We tend to focus a lot on post-mortem once it's all happened, and then we start wondering why it all happened and it's already gone wrong. We start to now talking about, okay, well, where could this happen? where might this go wrong now? So we start analysing and we start looking at those issues that we face. So it could happen in a club. Okay, what can we do? Work backwards from it has happened in a club. What do we need to do? So really questioning our thinking. And that's really important for our board. Because when I talked about some of the things that we missed, our board missed this. Our board was looking at the complaints, and it was looking at the top. It wasn't looking at actually what was the issues causing the symptoms. What were the symptoms here? We talk about ethical explorations. Again, I'm hoping I'm going to learn more today around that, around how do we work with our coaches in a more ethical space, much more reflective, being able to talk about how they might want to change their practices or the issues that they're concerned with. We're doing a huge amount of work of bringing in coach developers that work in situ with our coaches, not coach education and learning and development, actually walking alongside our coaches in the space, in the club, in the performance environment. A culture of care, easy to say, not as easy to do, but we're constantly reminding people that it is about the care of the individual. That comes first, not the performance of the individual. And truly understanding the impact. We've been extremely busy. We've taken forward a lot of actions, but they're only actions. We're starting to see some of the impact. We're starting to see conversations changing. We're starting to see people come forward and say, I'm not sure we're doing this right. I'm not sure this gymnast is being supported appropriately. Those conversations weren't happening before, so we're starting to see the impact. I'm just going to finish with a little bit of a section from Scott Bolesky's book, Messy in the Middle. The reform journey has felt a little bit like this. It's definitely been volatile. It's been full of starts and finishes. We're still going through it. We've got some peaks and we're still challenging ourselves and getting lost a little bit, but we're far more self-aware. We're certainly curious to learn from others. And I hope if we can keep and be convicted and keep our conviction, then we will actually feel the bounty and make the difference for everybody else and leave a huge legacy for gymnastics. And I finish there with just a thank you for listening. There's a lot of questions I'm sure that will come. I'm very happy that people contact me after this if they wish to learn anything more about our journey. But thank you for the opportunity, Rowley and the rest of the team.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. I don't think there's any doubt you're going to get questions coming from all corners, possibly of the world. So, but thank you so much. And just to get a sense of the thoroughness, this is systematic, it's all-encompassing, which is difficult in any sport. I think if we have a look then at how that plays out in terms of equestrianism, it's a very interesting mix as well. And you talk about the importance of ethical relations. Well, we've got just the person to address us now back into the world of equestrianism, because Mette Uldal is a Danish veteran who works primarily in the field of animal welfare, including equestrianism. And in addition to her work on ethics and animal-human relationship, Mette carries out a lot of research that focuses on topics such as the welfare of riding school horses, and within sport, the interplay with equine welfare of horses, oral health, the presence of conflict behaviors, and rider weight and skill. I think again there, Sarah, you talk about communication, or the challenges of communication with a horse are obviously that much more complex than perhaps with a young athlete, but a very interesting perspective. Mette's held numerous positions. I'll run through a few of them at national and European level in organizations overseeing equestrian sport, animal welfare, veterinary affairs, and is currently chief consultant in horse and animal welfare for Animal Protection Denmark. So we asked Mette to address this topic: welfare challenges in equestrian sport. Why do good people do bad things?
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk here at the World Horse webinar. I have looked forward to do my best to cover the topic welfare challenges in equestrian sport. Why do good people do bad things? I'll jump right in and start by asking, How can a do-gooder become a bad actor? Let's have a look at integrity and how we all risk losing our integrity over a time span of events. Inside all of us, we have a me. We have inner values, triggering and being triggered by emotions. We have an ego. We are balanced. We are in integrity. Inherently, we focus on doing good. However, all humans also focus on being good, being successful, being recognized or validated by others. And therefore, we also thrive to be good. Now, since we were little, many have had genuine interest, sometimes even vocation-like drives. An example is a little young person just wanting to be with horses. No one knows where it comes from. With age, we also have goals and ambitions. Both can be perfectly aligned with our integrity. However, sometimes goals and ambitions come from outside input, something we do to be told we are good, that we are valued. The way we get there is to learn skills, get tools to become better, driven by vocation, ambitions, goals, whatever drives us forward. If we want to be a good rider, then we take training lessons. Perhaps we go to competitions. We learn actions, methods, and tools from our trainers, peers, and other educational sources. And by spending hours practicing, we try to reach our individual goals. We are on a journey driven by human nature, and the horse happens to be right in the middle of this path. Absolutely essential for us to obtain our goal. The tools we were taught on this journey towards our personal goals are crucial for the way the horse experiences being part of the equestrian community. If a rider has been educated to interact with the horse in a way where the horse understands the intentions and where the rider does not compromise or pressure the horse, then all is good. If the rider has been taught since being a child to whip, kick, or put excessive pressure on the horse when riding, or to interact in ways which the horse does not understand, then the horse welfare will be compromised. Sometimes the horse will even be harmed from the tools and skills the rider has in the toolbox. Many riders have been brutalized along the way while being told that certain practices are perfectly okay or even necessary to become a skilled rider. Over time, the rider experiences a loss of integrity because it is very seldom the intention from the beginning to harm anyone. And the level of brutalization is depending on culture, regulation of horse sport, what is permitted. And where you end up on the scale is very dependent on who you meet on your journey becoming a rider. The horses you engage with on the way are completely depending on your tools in the toolbox. The far majority of humans comes from a place where we just want to do good. However, then we also want to be successful, fulfill ambitions, be recognized. Depending on the ingredients we add on this journey of developing people in our community, we get different results with regards to how the horses are governed. My name is Mette Uldal. I'm a vet working with animal welfare, ethics and transformation of cultures. I work with research, European politics, and as a consultant for different organizations. Let's also touch upon how we, humans, speak about animals, non-humans. In one of my research projects, we looked into the life and welfare of riding school horses. While I examined horses in this study, the person responsible for the horse was interviewed in detail about the horse behavior and a lot more. So I stood there for days, listening to the same questions being asked and the answers, and I started making notes because it occurred to me that we could define categories of how individual caretakers talked about the animals, and that these categories affected the caretaker's actions. You can relate to what you factually observe the horse doing. He is frustrated when I tighten the girth. You can use affectionate paraphrasing, like, he is so sweet when he's standing there and acting mad. Another category is attribution of negative intentions. You'll hear people say, some days he just refuses because he's mad. There's a fourth category, the disrespect for the individual. You will hear something along the line, look how stupid he looks when I tighten the girth. The four categories can be sorted in two different boxes, a green and a red one. In the green box, you observe the horse behavior and reproduce it correctly. In the red box, you observe the horse behavior and then you reproduce it incorrectly. By doing this, you evade your responsibility for the horse in the situation. There's only one category in the green box, that is reproducing the horse behavior as it is. He's frustrated. The rest of the categories belong in the red box. If you have ever heard yourself speak from the red box categories, then you're most likely an honorable member of the Department of Deception in equestrian sport. Perhaps you even have been awarded special distinctions for evading the understanding of the horse communication with humans. Why is it important how we speak about horses? Because how we see and if we choose to listen defines how and if we're going to react when the horse tries to communicate. We only act on a problem if we actively make ourselves conscious of the problem. So when humans perform the art or the mind game of paraphrasing, we are playing a game where the goal is to keep an observation at arm's length. We evade the obligation to do anything. Never underestimate the human mind. The problem when we do this is that a horse can't shout, whimper, or scream. If we do not react when we recognize them talking to us, no one takes care of the horse. So first thing you need to understand when governing animals is that the key to success is to understand and respect human nature. Let me explain by giving an example. For a decade, I've been researching all lesions from use of bits. I've published articles and identified key triggers. There are more lesions in the discipline dressage. There are more lesions at high level, which is of course a problem. The lesions are all chronic pressure wounds developed over time. There's no bleeding. It is important to recognize the difference between bleeding lesions, which tend to occur if riders put extensive pressure on the horse, so the horse ends up biting itself. This is different from the gradual development of chronic ulcers over time, due to the horse leaning too heavily on the bit. Both types are related to physical or mental pressure, which is unsolved. There's a strong relation between tightness of noseband and occurrence of all lesions. In a study with more than 3,000 competition horses, we found that by having a 2 to 3 centimeter room between the noseband and the nasal plate of the horses, the all lesions decrease with 34%, compared to a noseband tighter than 2 centimeters. If the noseband was in the loosest category, more than 3 centimeters, the lesions dropped additionally 34% compared to the category 2 to 3 centimeters. Overall, a whopping 68% from the tightest category to the loosest. Based on that, a noseband tightness rule was implemented in the Danish Equestrian Federation. And let me ask, do you think the evidence-based noseband tightness rule was easily accepted in the horse sport community? Well, the answer is a big no. At that time, I was still under the delusion that you can argue for changes if you present solid enough knowledge, evidence. The problem here is that it is evidence-based proven that humans act on emotions rather than evidence. If you look at studies of financial decision-taking, we act 90% on emotions and 10% on logic. This means it is good to have evidence at hand, so we know facts, but we can't expect evidence, updated knowledge to be implemented unless we know how to make humans change their habits. Humans also act on automation, habits. Our brain is wired to save energy by always doing the same procedures. We don't like change. Change is energy consuming and stressful, so we'd rather protest against change. If you ask questions about their priorities for the horses, they say, and they mean it, that governing horse welfare is a priority. Good horse management is a priority. Another priority is to train the horses and do good in competitions. In principle, all these priorities can be upheld. However, the problem comes when human nature are exposed to competition, when you get the opportunity to be recognized. Then evidence shows, when looking at human actions in real life, that the drive for recognition and winning comes first. We are not aware of this ourselves. We think we prioritize horse welfare, also in situations where we don't. I work with equine and oral cavity project. And since I've been in the rough school of lessons at national level in Denmark, working with implementation of updates and rules, I asked for a person with in-depth knowledge of the human mind, Professor Inka Wolfram, to be part of the team. So now we have a dual project. One part is handling horse welfare and the practicalities of an update. And the other part addresses human nature. Because the easy part of this project is to look at what we need to change to govern horse welfare better. While the hard part is to figure out how to get humans to accept the need for change. As I explained to you, human brains are wired to always follow the same procedures. So if you ask a rider to change something, you will evoke a lot of reactions and emotions at conscious and unconscious level. The rider brain will protest and think, what is wrong with what I've done so far? Do you even know anything about riding? And let's just stop and address this one. You don't have to know anything about riding to be able to see if the horse feels comfortable with a given interaction with a human. So assessment of behavior is not by any means comparable to, for example, judging a piaffe or pirouette according to a description in a sport format. The rider brain might also think, that's impossible. Then we all better just stop riding. All sorts of emotions and protests surface when humans are asked to change. In human nature, emotion trumps rationality. We are not conscious of this, and ironically, we are not good at acknowledging that we are unconscious of our emotions. On the contrary, we tend to claim that we are perfectly well aware. In that light, consider a situation where you ask a large group of riders to change. Then the shared mental pain will result in protest, particularly if it involves challenging a privilege, ranking in sport, recognition, position, financial gain, and other drivers. This is exactly why all individuals need a strong governance body to hold the hand and secure that they stay in integrity while seeking recognition, to ensure no one is harmed when human nature unfolds, particularly if animals and children are involved. In horse sport, various fit-to-compete protocols might be in place in relation to competition. For example, we might have protocols to look for physical markers like lameness or lesions, and to some degree, but very little, we have also started to look into the mental well-being of the horse, asking, "How are you?" However, the main question asked by questions in sport is still, how does the horse perform in competition? This question is related to precision of movement, gait, speed, capacity in jumping, basically all the things humans are impressed by. There'll be a judgment, a time or a score, a prize is handed to the rider. And right here, we chip into human nature, because giving humans awards and recognition is an extremely powerful tool for regulating human behavior. The assessment of the physical fitness is also important, as a horse can be eliminated if it is too lame or something. But the potential prize to the human supersedes it all. Fitness of the horse is usually evaluated by officials according to a given definition in a protocol. We have evidence that there's no correlation, or only very little, between looking at the horse objective behavior, asking, "Are you okay?" and the judges' scores of a discipline related to sports performance. In 21, we did a study where we showed a correlation between the dressage score, quality and harmony, and frequency of conflict markers for dressage horses. However, the correlation was outweighed by the scores related to performance, assessment of gaits, and others. So overall, horse welfare was not addressed in the ranking. Overall competition scores do not appear to correlate with the frequency of conflict behavior in various disciplines. Today, horse welfare is not addressed directly or sufficiently in horse sport formats. When it is addressed indirectly, it is very inefficient and untransparent. And just to emphasize how powerful a tool recognition is for humans, you can see me on this photo a couple of years ago after a triathlon with my kids. As you can see, I got a medal. I did finish last, but I got a medal. To get this, I swam, ran, and rode on a bike. And that is for sure not rational or sensible at all. But I did it because it triggered my ambitions. 25 years before, I competed in another sport, horse riding. Meta's ambitions and drive for recognition and medals was the same sitting on top of a horse, a sentient being, like when riding a bike. The big difference in the two situations is that the horse did not choose to enter dressage competitions. And this is exactly why we have a paramount obligation to govern horse welfare when we embark them in human activities, sport and entertainment. We all need a strong governance body to hold our hands, because we are only humans. For every type of horse sport or activity, we should ask, who is the right winner? It is not the horse, for the horse did not sign up for the competition in the first place. We should focus on the rider. Let's put focus on the rider's ability to communicate with the horse, making it comfortable. We can add a primary filter on top of all existing disciplines, objective evaluation of the horse behavior. Ask the horse, are you okay? If the horse is not okay, the rider can't have any prizes. If the frequency of conflict behavior is too high or solitary incidents are too severe, the rider should be eliminated. There might be an interesting add-on effect of this, where we'll open up the riding sport to a more diverse type of horse and riders. If the rider's ability to present a comfortable horse is of primary weight, the ranking becomes dependent only on rider skills. Let's talk about proportions of human minds we're dealing with. In Denmark, we have a population of around 6 million people. 100,000 persons are estimated to ride horses regularly. Around 55,000 are members of the Danish Equestrian Federation. Approximately 400 riders might hold international FEI license. Around 10 to 12 persons are ranked at high level FEI. Around half or less than half of these riders have been questioned by media about practices which are found to compromise horse welfare. Equestrian communities are a very tiny part of the overall society, and in some regards we deal with a small group of people having a high level of privilege in our community. The privilege is handed to them because of a lot of people inside horse sport support the structures as they are. If these structures initiate people to do the wrong thing, to become winners, then basically we all help in producing bad actors in horse sport. Everyone plays a role. Everyone who can learn more, listen more, and communicate better with horses has a responsibility to do so. We all influence the outcome of horse welfare in horse sport. And we do that wrongfully if we support traditions and culture which should be improved according to modern knowledge. The conservatism in our sport, reluctance to admit the need for even minor changes to secure horse welfare, and hereby horse sport in a modern context, is a problem. Horse sport disciplines does not need to change drastically. We only need to add one extra ingredient, to ask the horse, are you okay? Can we get rid of bad actors if we ask who is the right winner? And if the right winner is governed by solid principles, the positive incentive, presenting a comfortable horse based on objective evaluation of behavior, the necessary negative incentive, ensuring that camouflage, reduction of natural senses, and harming the horse is not permitted. I was asked, why do good people do bad things? There are lots of reasons. The main thing is to understand how difficult it is for all of us to control human nature. So, acknowledging human nature, I would like to change the question and ask, who is the right winner? Thank you.
Well, Mette, thank you so much for that presentation. It wasn't just fascinating, I think it was provocative and challenging as well in terms of breaking with the tradition of a sport and the way in which we look at the participants, the riders and the horses. And again, bringing up so many questions. I mean, I love the notion of the Department of Deception, I have to say, which I think helps to give a picture as to some of the challenges that are there as well. And we're going to move on that theme actually in just a moment. Before we do go to Tim, to our third speaker, can I just remind everybody, we have a question and answer opportunity through the Slido system, top right-hand corner of the page. Please do start putting in your questions, as many or as few as you like. They can be targeted or general. But so we will have questions that we can then bring to our four speakers in our panel discussion as well. So I'd like to turn now to Tim Downs, who is a vastly experienced equestrian, who teaches riders, judges dressage, trains coaches all over the world. And in addition to being a fellow of the British Horse Society, the BHS, he's also chairman of the BHS Fellows Association, a BHS chief assessor, an international five-star eventing judge, a British Dressage List 1 judge, a British Dressage tutor judge, and recipient of the BHS Trainers Award in 2013. Tim has been joint owner of the Industry Stables. That's one of the UK's leading equestrian training centres for over 40 years now. And that's teaching riders right through, as Meta was referencing, right through from grassroots to elite level, very much involved in coach education and development. So, Tim, we'd love you to talk more then about that move from leisure riders to elite sport. What drives poor welfare practices and what can we do about it?
David, thank you very much. And thank you, Rolly, for the invite to discuss. I feel quite honoured to be amongst so many learned people and slightly concerned I'm going to come across as the yokel from the backwoods, but hey, that's the risk I'll take. Accountability for welfare and equestrianism and looking beyond the obvious. I'm going to look at it from three key areas. But first, I'm going to think about what is an equine welfare issue. I think a lot of people are very good, and I would reinforce exactly what Meta's just said. The physical welfare issues are easily seen. The mental welfare issues are easier for people to ignore, but they're also potentially harder for people to see. And I think we've got to get that message out there that a welfare issue isn't always a physical issue. I'm going to look at it a little bit from what impacts on welfare. And I'm going to look at it from three key areas: the economy, the education, and the environment, all of which have an impact on the horse and how the horse is dealt with and how he lives his life. And just as I'm going to throw a few little examples in of how welfare impacts and then changes. The horse you're looking at there was seriously affected by economy. He was bought as a baby horse very cheaply by somebody that actually couldn't afford to keep a horse. And so as a 2 or 3-year-old horse, he was physically neglected and in a terrible state. The picture you're looking at there, he's 28 years old and still was loving life at that point. Economy totally affected that horse's welfare until he came to see us, and he spent 25 years with us. But the root of his neglect was purely economic to start with. So let's think about, why does economy impact on welfare? Time. Ethical and horse-centric training takes time. Time costs money. So people take shortcuts to save time, to save money, particularly in the early training of the horse, in the initial training of the horse, where we're trying to teach the horse to recalibrate his balance and recalibrate his thinking and his instinctive behavior to deal with the fact that he's got the weight of a human on his back, takes time. Very often that time is shortened down to a matter of weeks in order to deal with the economy. Money. Keeping horses is expensive. So many horses that are kept with insufficient available funds. Education. Education costs money, and we've got many uneducated equestrians training horses. Facilities. Facilities cost money, and many horses are kept and trained in very poor facilities. In many countries, elite riders work on a medals for money funding mechanism. When there are no medals, the support dries up, both official money from government, but also from sponsors. Sponsors prefer to pay when there are medals involved. And so that medals for money has a huge impact, again, economy. And in many countries where funding is available, it's funded from the top down rather than from the bottom up. So money is given to the top of the sport rather than to support the grassroots end of the sport. And in our sport, that's particularly significant at entry level. For many, many sports, nearly every sport, at entry level, participation is either very inexpensive or it's free. Globally, many schools encourage many sports. And when a young person wants to expresses an interest in a sport, school facilitates free entry level to a whole range of sports. But even at entry level, our sport is expensive. So that's just, again, how economy can impact on what happens. So when we think a little bit about what we might be able to do about that, or what could be done, strong representation to government to support basic equestrian education, to make our sport on a more level playing field with so many other sports. Which is lobbying for funding from grassroots upwards rather than elites downwards. If we supported the education at the bottom end, that would facilitate better learning, more time for people to learn, and would have a big impact on eventually the welfare of the horse. I think there could be more widespread education on the real cost of keeping horses. Far too many people at grassroots level look at a very basic way of keeping a horse and ultimately compromise the welfare of the horse. I think there could be greater regulation of equestrian suppliers and service providers who profiteer from the equestrian marketplace. And in a not so pleasant way of looking at it, but it's a very true fact. As a riding centre, if we have a horse that gets to the end of his life and we have to deal with that situation, it costs about 15 times more to dispose of a horse carcass than it does a cow carcass. What happens to that carcass is identical, but the cost to the horse market is considerably more. I think would be a huge asset to our industry if we could have a global definition and acceptance of which commercial sector equestrianism belongs in. As a sport, we get shipped from the leisure industry to the sport industry, and that has a big impact on funding and on governance and on legislation. We don't belong in any specific government sector, and we get moved about far too much, which has a big impact on what happens eventually to the horse. So for me, economy is a significant part of what goes on with our horses. Then I'm going to look a little bit at education, which is clearly a big part of what happens to the horse. And so here we'll look at another horse this horse had the very best start in life, certainly not an economy problem. He was purpose-bred to be a top performance horse. He lived in the lap of luxury with every facility that could be needed with top-class care. But his educational process, his initial training, resulted in, as can happen with some horses, a serious compromise in the way that he was able to use his body. And when the early education of a horse isn't in the horse's best interests, some horses manifest that by shutting down and losing their movement, but continue to sort of do the job. Some manifest it by showing behaviors that people don't like, antisocial behaviors, some people would call them. This horse, like some do, decided that he could no longer remain in true gaits. So effectively, he went lame and had lots and lots of money thrown at him trying to diagnose why he'd gone lame, all of which was inconclusive. And eventually he was written off and he has a loss of use brand on his back. I firmly believe, or I know for a fact, that his irregularity was purely through the way he was educated, because he then came to us and was taught to use his body in the right way and to carry himself and to move forward through his body. And he's now successfully competing, absolutely sound, on no medication, no support, and is doing what he actually came out to do with a loss of use brand on his back because of the way that he was initially educated. So why does education impact on welfare? Let's think about the coaches who are primarily responsible for the education. We have many coaches who are still teaching outdated techniques. And as we heard from various people earlier on, the human mind takes a lot of change. So the cascade system of outdated techniques is strong. People learned things years ago and they've passed it down through the generations, and people struggle to let go of those processes and techniques. So we have many coaches that are still teaching outdated techniques. We have many coaches who are unregulated and have no CPD compliance, which only encourages them to stay with their outdated techniques, because there is no requirement for coaches to update, to become aware of new developments, modern research. They're completely working unregulated. Many coaches that teach beyond their own skill set and knowledge, because there is no restriction on what our coaches teach. And the learner, if the coach is plausible, the learner goes with the coach and believes the coach. And we have many coaches teaching beyond their own skill set. We have many coaches who are accomplished horse trainers and performance riders, but they have insufficient rider training skills. We have insufficient ability to develop the human, but they're still working as coaches. We have many trainers who have an imbalance between skills and knowledge. So they understand how to do something, but they can't necessarily discuss why, and they can't develop the knowledge in their learners. And we have an awful lot of education that is based on sales research, which can encourage a bit of a one size fits all. We see an awful lot of products put on the marketplace that is going to mend everybody's problem, and failure to recognize that horses are actually all individuals. And that becomes very significant. So we also have to think about the impact of assigning competence based on competition success, which is something that our industry or sport does very successfully. As an industry and a leisure activity, we're guilty of assessing competence through success rather than through objective process. Imagine if the aviation industry leisure activity worked on that basis. I can afford to buy myself a little plane and have a go in it. I get in it, I start the engine, I make it fly. It flies round and I manage to land it successfully. I'm therefore deemed competent. And because I'm deemed competent, I can go and get myself a larger aeroplane. And I can have a go in that. And if I manage to fly that round, great. I'm even more competent now. I can go and get a bigger one. And so the process goes on. And eventually I'm in a very large aeroplane and I hit the fog. And I don't actually know what to do. I have no real foundation in my skill. It's never been assessed objectively. It's only been assessed through my success. That whole process has a huge impact on horse welfare. Fortunately, there is nowhere in the world that you can have a go in an aeroplane. There's lots of places in the world where you can have a go on a horse. So what could be done? We could lobby for stronger legislation of coaches with regard to competence and compulsory professional development. We could, governing bodies' assessment of coaches' competence could be more objective and include both skills and knowledge. And perhaps a little bit put in here, I have a little bit of a thing about the education of judges, particularly dressage judges. For me, dressage judges spend too long in their critique noting symptoms rather than diseases. And where we've heard talk already today about bitting issues and tight nose bands. To a certain extent, not totally, we have to think about that process that goes on with judges. If a horse loses its balance or is distracted and momentarily, because it loses its balance, it feels the bit, it opens its mouth, because that's the first thing that's going to happen when the balance loses. When the judge writes mouth open and doesn't think about the impact of that comment, the rider reacts to that comment, I lost marks because my horse opened its mouth. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tighten the noseband. But actually, if the judge had written loss of balance, which is what causes the problem, that sends a completely different message to the rider. So the terminology used and the education of judges, I think, could really support what we're talking about. I think insurance companies could insist on evidence of coaches' competence. It is very easy to gain insurance as a coach in our industry. It's not expensive, it's very easily obtained, and insurance companies currently look for no evidence of competence. And I think we could have greater influence and control of publicity and validation of research. So what I'm saying here with education is I think we could look a little bit outside our industry. We tend to always look in, we want to make our people better. We want to educate more within the industry, but I think we could use a lot more, have impact by going outside our industry a little bit. What else could be done? We could make equine physiology and psychology compulsory elements of learning and assessment for coaches. There is not sufficient demand for coaches to actually understand the psychology of the horse, the basic instinct pattern of the horse, how horses think, how horses react by nature. We could be more clear during coach education that training horses is equal measures of walking the walk and talking the talk. We have a lot of armchair experts who can seriously talk the talk, but they can't put it into practice. We have an awful lot of people who can clearly walk the walk. They're effective riders, but as coaches, they can't educate the rider. They don't supply the underpinning knowledge and understanding. And we could assess all coaches on their ability to develop rider skills and understanding, as well as their ability to train horses. We tend to use coaches, or many people use coaches who have been successful riders, and we don't educate participants enough that a good rider, a good performer, a good trainer of horses is not necessarily a good coach or necessarily a good judge. They're all completely different skills, and when a good rider metamorphosizes themselves into a judge or a coach, they don't necessarily have the skill set that enables them to be truly proficient in that job. Again, that can have a negative impact on horse welfare. One more horse very quickly. This horse, again, didn't have a problem from an economy point of view. Started off with a problem environmentally. Young horse kept in a DIY livery yard, very ad hoc routine. Uneducated carers, became very distressed. As a 5-year-old horse, was on his way to be shot because he was deemed untrainable, antisocial, dangerous, had hurt lots of people. Very bad education process. Horse bred to be able to perform, tried to be made to perform before he was physically or mentally able to do what was expected of him, to the point that he was about to be destroyed through it being dangerous. We acquired him. He probably taught more riders to ride lines of flying changes and piaffe and passage than many other horses alive, because he was actually one of the kindest, nicest horses you could wish to meet once he began to trust people. But he had his trust in people completely destroyed as a young horse. And then quickly looking at the environment and where that can have a negative impact on the horse's welfare. There are many toxic or competitive yards with a toxic or competitive atmosphere. Too many horses kept in very irregular routines, at grassroots level in particular. And the horse is one of the principles of looking after horses is routine. Too many poor quality or badly managed facilities, insufficient skills and knowledge and finance to deal with key management issues. And that demand from academics for all horses to live in a one-size-fits-all perfect environment. There's been a huge surge over the last few months of panicking grassroots horse owners, desperate to find a livery situation where their horse can live 24/7 outdoors in a herd environment, because the message is coming out that that's the only way to keep a horse. And there's not enough recognition that actually horses are indigenous to temperate climate. That means by nature they are able to adapt to change. Something that lives in a temperate climate adapts through the year, from the height of summer to the depths of winter. Horses are adaptable. And actually a horse that spent its life in one situation to suddenly be thrown out in a field 24/7 in a large herd would be far more traumatized than the horse staying in potentially the environment that it's in. But that whole push of perfect lifestyle for the horse is having a very negative impact and a panic impact on many owners. So what can be done about the environment? Better legislation of equestrian establishments, more emphasis in education on routines, equine instincts, facility and surface maintenance. So many of those things are not taught. Some legislation towards competence-based horse ownership and a creation of more community access to horses, which does happen, but it tends to not happen for everybody. So again, something that we can think about. But that was just a very brief sort of run through of where I feel welfare is impacted and thinking of looking outside a little bit. But as Sarah said earlier, you know, within our sport, mostly it's very good. Probably Sarah talked about in athletics, 90% good. It's very true to say you only need one rotten apple in a barrel to affect the whole barrel. And it's that 10% that we've got to deal with. I think that's probably it from me. We need to think one more little thing in my last minute from a teaching point of view is my thoughts on the word make. In the early training of riders, it's probably critical that the word make is used, because a new rider on a horse instinctively needs to know that they can make the horse stop, start and turn. But once that's established, I firmly believe coaches should never use the word make, because you can't make it piaffe, make it jump big fences. You can train it, cause it, encourage it. But when we embed the word make in the human mindset, we teach forceful riders. That's not good for the horse. So, my thoughts on where we are with welfare. Thank you very much for listening.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. I'm a huge catalogue of challenges that you've laid out there. And I mean, education was one of the themes, but education is clearly one of the absolute essences of improving the cultural situation. But it does raise those questions, as you pointed out, as to whose responsibility it is to bring that into play. And that is where we're going to go to straight after our break with Mita. We have a 10-minute break now, so we'll catch up on time. Just to remind you once again, please get your questions into the Slido system. They're coming in now, so the more the merrier. We'll sift through those. You've got 10 minutes to think of one as well now, because we're going to give you a short break, and then we'll be back and we can hear from Mita Osborne as our next speaker. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to welcome into our midst Mita Osborne. Mita is a vet who spent the majority of her career focused on equine stud medicine in Ireland. She's a past president of both the Veterinary Association and the Veterinary Council of Ireland, and has been involved in the regulation and the administration of horse racing in Ireland as well, most notably as senior steward of the Turf Club and board member of Horse Racing Ireland. However, there's quite a lot more to come, because Mita is also co-owner of Tinnakill House, which is a family-owned and run commercial thoroughbred stud farm, which has produced a number of Group 1 winners, other stakes class performers as well. And in 2023, Mita completed an MSc in Animal Welfare, Ethics and Law. That was at the University of Edinburgh. And that's led to a range of opportunities which bring together the worlds of welfare science and equestrian sport, including co-hosting Changing Rein, which you may know in any case, it's a podcast exploring the future of horse sport through a welfare lens. So no one better, Mita, than to tackle this one, shouldering the responsibility for protecting equine welfare in racing. Where do the bucks stop?
Thank you so much. Thanks to World Horse Welfare for inviting me today. Yes, I have worn many hats. I suppose today I'm here as someone who has a strong interest in the regulation of racing, but I am also an equine vet, and I became acutely aware of the pressures that racing and equestrian sports are under from the perspective of accountability for equine welfare during my time at the top table of racing regulation in Ireland. I realised that there was a lot I didn't know, so that's why I went back relatively late in life and I undertook a master's in animal welfare, which I finished in 2023. My presentation is strongly influenced by what I have learned on that journey. Where exactly do the bucks stop with accountability for equine welfare in horse racing? I wish there was a simple answer. There is no simple answer. But I believe as a first step, we need to understand what we actually mean by accountability. To help with this, I would like to present a framework for accountability, which has certainly helped me understand the complexities involved. I have based it on the story of Stretch. Stretch is a fictional Irish jockey. You learn a little bit about his troubles and challenges, and I will suggest some solutions that could have applications across equestrian disciplines in general. But before that, I wanted to put horse racing in context. Although I believe fundamentally that horse sport is horse sport, there are certainly some differences between racing and other equestrian pursuits, not least the fact that thoroughbred horse racing is the horse sport with the greatest economic impact globally. And this is maybe why the title of my talk mentions bucks in the plural. It's difficult to come up with a composite figure, but in this slide, I have tried to give some indication of its economic importance in various international jurisdictions. Here in Ireland, thoroughbred racing and breeding represent our 5th largest agricultural export. There are definitely some differences between how racing and other horse sports are organised and governed, which I wanted to highlight in this slide. Governance, veterinary oversight and drug testing generally happen to a rigorous and consistent level across multiple jurisdictions in racing, although there may be some local variations. There are usually strict regulations on the use of the whip. There's an increasing focus on retirement and retraining programs and generally standardised penalties. Most importantly, there are high levels of public scrutiny, which is probably not surprising when you think of the money involved. And because racing is so highly regulated, accountability is crucial at every step. So I'm going to tell you about Stretch, this fictional jockey who bears no resemblance to any other jockey, living or dead. Did you read the Daily News this morning? One of our leading Irish jockeys, known to his pals as Stretch, has been found guilty of excessive use of the whip and faces a 16-day suspension. Stretch is self-employed, and this ban will be a significant blow to his riding opportunities at the peak of the racing season, and that's one reason for the long face. He stands to lose around €9,000 in riding fees because of lost opportunities. It seems obvious that Stretch is the culprit here, and the buck stops with him. He broke a rule meant to safeguard horse welfare, and now he must pay the price. I should say here that this presentation is absolutely not about rehashing the whip debate. At the heart of accountability lies a framework which sets out who is accountable to who and why. In sport and in most human endeavours, whether it's your local tennis club or your parliament, this framework is set out in a series of rules and regulations, generally brought together in a rule book. When you think of jockeys like Stretch, you know that they are governed by rules because, as I've said, horse racing is a very highly regulated sport. Every racing jurisdiction will have its equivalent of IHRB Rule 125, Roman numeral 2, representing the overall accountability of Stretch and his weighroom colleagues. And when you think of jockeys, you inevitably think of the whip, whether you agree with its use or not. IHRB Regulation 10.3 covers whip use. It has 11 subsections, and subsection 10.3G is the one that covers excessive frequency of whip use. Every jurisdiction where the whip is allowed will have its own version of Regulation 10.3G. This is a rule that everyone knows about. even if they don't know the details or the penalties, and therefore it provides us with an opportunity to discuss how accountability works. So let's take a step back from Stretch for a second and his woes and talk a little bit about accountability. It's one of those concepts we all think we understand what it means, but how does it apply in action? One way of thinking about accountability is through the use of a framework in which the various levels of accountability are nested one inside the other. At the heart of the concept is personal accountability. This is our individual moral compass. It's about doing the right thing even if no one is watching. It's about taking intentional ownership of our behaviour and our actions. In order for sports like horse racing to function successfully, there is a need for organisation and for regulation. At this level, we talk about structural accountability. Those who organise and regulate the sport do so to ensure fairness to all participants, including, most importantly, the horses. And they are accountable to the participants for how they do this. But no sport can operate in a vacuum. What we do as a sport has to align with what matters to society. We call this social accountability, and so it is important that the sport's governing bodies are aware of this. Accountability is a two-way process. If your boss gives you a project, you are, of course, accountable for its delivery on time and on budget. But your boss is accountable to you for providing the necessary support and resources. I've already said that participants are accountable to the governing bodies, but these governing bodies are also accountable to the participants. They need to ensure that the rules that they devise are clear, coherent, and unambiguous. They also must administer their judicial processes fairly. And in sports, there are additional accountability flows from participants to society, and one that is less often recognised, from society to participants. Let's get back to Stretch. He is a participant in the sport of horse racing, and we all agree that he is accountable for his actions, not least because if he breaches the rules of racing, there will be sanctions. But where it gets confusing for Stretch are the multiple pressures he finds himself under. There are rules about excessive use of the whip, but there's also a rule about riding a horse to obtain its best possible placing, so Stretch is confused. Which takes precedence? There is a trainer whose business model relies on Stretch riding plenty of winners, but at what cost? There's the owner, anxious for the prestige of leading in a winner, but how happy is he to be associated with a jockey who whips a horse excessively? There are the racing fans who perhaps had a bet and won, but maybe feel a little uncomfortable with the manner of that win. Or maybe theirs was a losing bet, placed on the horse who finished behind Stretch's mount, but whose jockey kept within the rules. And then there are the animal rights activists protesting at the gate about racehorse welfare, who consider the use of the whip a welfare issue. Then there is the culture in the weigh room, which may or may not condone a win at all costs. At this point, I'd like to mention a recently published study by Dave O'Neill and other Irish colleagues, which looked at jockeys' weighing room culture in the context of rapid weight loss. It is sobering reading. They found that the desire for social validation from other jockeys and the need to appease trainers contributes to a normalisation of damaging weight loss practices among jockeys. As a byproduct, rapid weight loss has been associated with cognitive impairment in jockeys, so it could be argued that Stretch might not have been in a position to fully understand what he was doing in the moment. Both rapid weight loss practices and excessive use of the whip are part of a culture of winning at all costs, which is highly likely to be normalised within the weigh room. What do sponsors think? Their involvement contributes to prize money, and perhaps Stretch himself has a sponsor. Are they just interested in being associated with success, or have they concerns about the negative headlines? Because as we saw, there are headlines on the daily news and of course on social media. Stretch thinks about his parents, who will see the headlines. He thinks about how much of a role model he is for his kids. He thinks about his education, where he learned little or nothing about animal welfare through no fault of his own. And he thinks about how and why he first got involved with horses, because he loved them and he loved being around them, only to find himself now branded an animal abuser and worse. Let's try and put some structure on Stretch's accountability. Some factors are personal to him, some relate to racing structures, and some are in the social realm. Stretch's own moral compass will have been shaped by his upbringing and his education, and he may or may not feel a degree of remorse for his actions. What was the ethos in the yard where he learned to ride? Were horses seen as tools of the trade or living, feeling beings? We'll come to this later. He has the pressure of trying to earn a living and provide for his children. And he works in a highly competitive and dangerous professional sport where questionable behaviour often becomes normalised. The structural elements of horse racing play a role too. Stretch is accountable under the rules, but what if the rules are ambiguous? What if there's a culture in the weigh room of not speaking up? What if the financial well-being of racing, remember that economic impact slide, means that there's a reluctance to fully embrace horse welfare? Ultimately, all equestrian sport is subject to public acceptability, and though it might be a stretch for Stretch, he has a role to play here too. This brings challenges because a complex issue is often presented in the media as black and white with a lack of nuance. And this is where the two-way street of accountability breaks down. Stretch may be subjected to virulent attacks on social media, and he feels he lacks the education, the tools, or the language to counter this. This presentation focuses on Stretch, but of course there are other accountable stakeholders in horse racing, each accountable in different directions, so it is a complex web. Trainers have a business to run and are expected to be welfare aware, but there are probably not enough hours in the day for all that. They largely rely on their vets to ensure the well-being and health of their horses, but vets are not only accountable to their clients, but have a professional duty to be advocates for horses, and this may conflict with what the trainer wants. Some owners see racing as a business with the same pressures that trainers have, while others want the prestige associated with winners. They are also expected to be welfare aware, even though they may have no day-to-day contact with horses. Sponsors have to consider their brand reputation and are answerable to shareholders. Stewards and officials need to ensure that governance structures are fair and transparent and that society's expectations about horse welfare are met. Bookmakers play a major role in the funding of horse racing, and it is vital to their business model that racing is run fairly and cleanly and that integrity is not compromised. Thinking back to our accountability framework, you will recall that the regulator sits bang in the middle, accountable to both participants and society. Having been chair of a racing regulator, I can tell you that it is no easy task. Participants expect to be treated fairly and impartially by a system of governance that prioritises horse welfare and human safety. Society expects the regulator to provide integrity and oversight without fear or favour. But common to both sets of expectations are openness, transparency and engagement. Stretch often wonders why he should be accountable to society when he seems to get nothing but grief. But societal expectations around racing are to be welcomed, especially when they reflect genuine ethical concerns about welfare, integrity, the environment and inclusion. Why I think Stretch is concerned is because some commentators demonstrate a limited understanding of what can be a complex sport. I have mentioned that accountability works two ways, and I think that people who have concerns about horse racing are also accountable for broadening their own knowledge and understanding. And of course, racing's governing bodies have a part to play in this. Of course, the horse is central in racing and indeed all equestrian sport. That is why we are here today. I think it's worth taking a moment to think about the various participants in our accountability framework and how they might view the horse's role. Stretch probably started out loving his pony, but nowadays are the horses he rides just tools of his trade? For the regulators, how much experience or understanding have they of the horse as a sentient being? And we have to accept in modern society, horses are seen as living, feeling beings, and their welfare is non-negotiable. So maybe we all need to take a look in the mirror and see where we stand. With Stretch, feeling all those multiple pressures to succeed? Am I a regulator who sees this welfare stuff as an irritation? Are all of us considering the horse's point of view? One key aspect of accountability is transparency, not just doing the right thing, but being seen to do it. Transparency improves fairness because everyone is following the same rules. It improves trust because it builds public confidence in the sport, and it acts as a deterrent because the visible consequences of rule breaking are there for all to see. But transparency brings challenges, and this is where things get tricky, not just for Stretch, but for all stakeholders. You can decide for yourself which of the challenges to transparency I've listed here are the most important. What I have done is categorise them according to the framework, so that, for example, fear of loss of control might matter greatly to the regulators, while for a trainer, maybe it's the loss of competitive edge by revealing their training practices. And of course, change is difficult for everyone. So it's not enough to push for transparency. We must also offer to support participants to overcome their particular challenges. No matter what situation we find ourselves in, taking a deep breath and reframing things can really help. As Henry Ford said, the only real mistake is one from which we learn nothing. So for Stretch and for everyone involved in equestrian sport at all levels, I'm suggesting a transparency toolbox. Regulators need to clearly set out the rules of the sport, rules that are based on evidence and not in conflict with one another. Their decision making needs to be timely and transparent. When we make mistakes, we need to acknowledge them openly. And when we have acknowledged our mistakes, whether as individuals or at the structural level, we should be transparent in how we follow up and remedy the situation. The good news for Stretch is that the IHRB offers a suite of support from jockey coaches, sports psychologists and strength and conditioning trainers to help him learn from his mistake. Some of the issues that arise in racing and in other equestrian sports may be within the rules, but ethically questionable. This is where Stretch was really struggling. His own moral compass told him that there was something wrong with hitting a horse, but there were so many other competing pressures in his life. I would like to propose two interlinked solutions. The concept is far from the finished product, though variations have been used in other settings, especially healthcare. And I would love to start a conversation about how this might work. I would like to acknowledge my friend and colleague Bronwyn Williams, who is also a friend of World Horse Welfare, for her help in teasing this out. I am proposing spaces for people like Stretch to learn and grow. One would be a reflective practice group and the other a no-fault zone. The reflective practice group would be a facilitated group discussion with the primary aim of increasing welfare awareness among industry participants. The ground rules would be established ahead of time and it would be independent of, but fully endorsed by the regulator. One suggested approach is the what, so what, now what, adapted by Rolfe and colleagues in 2001 in a handbook for nursing, but originally developed by Burton as far back as 1970 and used in healthcare settings since. This involves asking what by describing the facts of the event. What happened? What was the context? So what? By analysing sense-making and drawing insights from the event and its implications. And now what? To consider effective next steps, an action plan. Groups are not for everyone. So the other part of the proposal is a no-fault zone, where participants could discuss their concerns in a safe, non-punitive set space, again, using reflective practice techniques. We've all been in situations where we realise that something we have taken for granted as normal within our sport may in fact not stand up to scrutiny on welfare grounds. The no-fault zone would be a place where people can raise concerns or admit mistakes which didn't break the rules as they stand, without fear of punishment. Of course, the regulator in me is a little bit worried about this. Would this be a major get-out for people who want to game the system? This is why the ground rules need to be established beforehand, and there should be no let-up on the investigation and sanction of people who have broken the rules as they stand today. I genuinely believe that this concept could provide much needed support for people like Stretch. But these spaces could also provide really valuable insights to help improve the rules, and in particular, support participants on their journey towards understanding what a good life for horses looked like. That way everyone would benefit, but most of all the horse. And maybe we might have a role for Stretch as our new equine welfare ambassador. I've provided some references, and I am more than happy to take questions or to discuss this with anyone who is interested in the concepts I've presented today. Thank you very much.
Mita, thank you very much indeed. I was struck by Stretch actually, because he smiles throughout most of that, and yet he's hiding behind a whole plethora of challenges and risks to his profession, his livelihood. A really good sort of layout of the issues there, with some very intriguing potential answers to some of those problems. Thank you very much indeed for providing that. So to Mita and Meta, how did we get a Mita and a Meta on the same panel? That in itself was an achievement. But also to Sarah and to Tim, thank you so much for your contributions there. And with that, I'd like to pass back to Roly.
David, thank you. What a fascinating conference with the experience of our all four presenters looking at accountability for welfare in equestrianism and wider sport. And I was reflecting on the need to listen and to create a culture of being curious, but also that culture of care. I was fascinated to think about that the Department of Deception and whether we are paid up members of that, and what drives human behaviour and how we should reflect on those key drivers. The acronym, of course, of looking at that framework around the 3 E's of the economy, education and the environment, and the fact that we should never get on a plane where Tim's the pilot, but equally we should never be saying that we make our horses do anything, we ask them. And finally, that acronym of the framework around the PSS, the personal, the societal and the structural. And I think within all of that is so much for each and every one of us to reflect on. So in terms of what next, I think 3 potential actions to suggest. Firstly, for us to really reflect on not only on what we've heard today, but also in conjunction with the 2024 Social Licence Conference that we put out last January, and then to reflect on all of those ideas and how we can put that into our own world. And then think about that personally, because I was struck by what Sarah said about that drip of the issues that arise within training, within gymnastics, and that certainly reads across to the equestrian world too. There's no magic bullet here. We make incremental change. Every single change we make will seep through equestrianism and really help others to change too, but also to build that trust with the public so we have a sustainable future. And then finally, changing behaviour, something that we know is not easy. But certainly we know from many surveys now that there's many people within equestrianism that are really keen to change too. So the third call to action is to find your tribe. Find those so you can work together with others and you don't feel so alone. And certainly World Horse Welfare will help you in any way we can to find your tribe. So finally, a recording of this conference will be available shortly, and I would urge you to suggest to others within the equestrian world watch this too, so they can seek to learn from it. do let us know if we should be running similar events like this. And I very much hope you'll join us for our next social licence event, which is a media briefing on Tuesday the 3rd of June, where we'll be looking at the latest YouGov survey results on public perception of the involvement of horses in equestrian sport. So a huge thank you to you for joining us and watching today. A big thank you to David, to Meta, to Mita, to Tim and to Sarah for providing such thoughtful insight. And of course, a big thank you to Argria and Lemure for supporting us putting on today's event.